Hi, anyone and everyone. Welcome to Have You Heard About This Case? My name is Sam.
And my name is Kelly.
Today's case is going to be a wild ride, and I'm quite positive you know nothing about this case. So before we dive in, I don't want to give anything away. Let's get into our intro question.
Okay, so my intro question is fairly simple because as we talked a little bit about off air, today has been Friday, but for me anyway, I've been riding the struggle bus a lot today. So, my intro question is kind of a softball. What was your favorite vacation that you took as a kid?
It's a good question. I never took, well, we did take vacations, just not frequently.
Even like car trips.
See, we were in the car a ton when I was a kid. That was kind of every day. It felt like we were constantly traveling between Illinois and Wisconsin. But
Did you ever go anywhere fun?
well, it was always like between home. But I'm thinking like when I was a kid, we went to Texas for a family reunion.
Oh.
It was the most hectic trip I have ever been on. Everything went wrong. But it was like, in retrospect, it's hilarious kind of what happened. And our flights were delayed by like overall like 10 hours. And then we had issues. We arrived in the middle of the night and we couldn't get into our hotel. We couldn't find the front door because all the lights were down. It was like 3 a.m. And then we had
awesome.
Yeah, we switched to we went to a different area of Texas in a new hotel, and there was a fire in that hotel when we were there.
Oh my God. I asked you your favorite childhood vacation. This is like a nightmare childhood vacation.
I haven't been on many vacations in my life, just in general. Like, I've been lucky enough to travel, but I wouldn't consider them vacation.
Me either.
So it's basically between this Texas trip and a Florida trip when I was 5 that I vaguely remember. Those are really my vacations. So Texas wins because it's a better story.
Give Sam a raise. She works really hard. She needs a vacation.
Well, I don't consider like me going back to Wisconsin a vacation because it just feels different.
But you deserve a real vacation, like where you get to go to like touch the ocean and like the dust or whatever earth signs do. I'm a Pisces.
See, I've been on more vacations as an adult. Just as a kid, those were the only 2 I really went on when I was a kid.
Yeah, and I fully am in agreement with your statement that travel is not really a vacation.
Yeah, I just think your mindset's just different between the 2.
Yeah.
What about you? As a kid, what was your favorite vacation?
So, it's a tie for me. One is we would go up to Maine every summer to visit my great aunt, who we called Grandma. She was wonderful. She lives and still lives, kicking it to this day in her own home in this old, super cool house in Wiscasset. And she had a cabin that was on a lake. Couldn't swim in the lake. It was down to the rocks. But the whole point of it was called Round Pond. And the whole point of going to Round Pond was that you were going to bring as many books as you possibly could. So you're going to read. Because there's no Wi-Fi. And the cable is sketchy at best. And you're going to wait until 4 p.m., which is what my grandmother calls cocktail hour. And one of my favorite stories ever about her is that she used to, every cocktail hour, mix herself a Jack Daniels on the rocks. And she would take off her glasses and she would stir the drink with the stem, lick them off, and put them back on.
Oh, ew. Somebody who has worn glasses for 30 years. No, thanks.
She's great. And then the other one is just really simple. Epcot, yo.
Oh, yeah, I know you've told me about your trip with Epcot that you really enjoy.
Yeah, that was more of an adult. I went with my dad as a college graduation present. And let me tell you, folks, there's nothing more gratifying than going and drinking around the world at Epcot.
Yeah, I haven't been there. Well, we were at Epcot when I said I went when I was 5 to Disney and Universal. That's it. So I was definitely not drinking. I went to the Toy Story parade. So I do remember that. That was the year Toy Story came out.
I'm so embarrassing. When I was a kid and to this day, it's not just drinking around the world for me. It's like I have a list. So does my dad. We call my mom and my little brother the dead weight because they walk too fast or too slow through the crowd. And we make a beeline to all the mountains because you get to do Space Mountain, Splash Mountain, and Railroad Mountain. And then I need to immediately report to the Haunted Mansion. And hopefully by then it's cocktail hour.
Yeah, I do remember going on Space Mountain. I don't think Haunted Mansion was a thing back then.
Oh, it's so good, Sam. You would love Haunted Mansion.
I was on the old school Tower of Terror. And I do remember that because I was way too small for it. I should not have gone on. I was 5 years old, and this is before they had like an actual seatbelt. It was just a bar that they would have across the seats, and I would float up to the bar, and my mom would have to put her arm around me because I just would float off of my seat.
This is absolutely unacceptable because I do not play with Tower of Terror. I do not like that.
I loved it.
I'm way too busy on Rock and Roller Coaster. And if you're telling me there are going to be no seatbelts.
There are now. This was the mid-90s.
I don't care.
No seatbelts then.
There was once no seatbelts. And it's going to go up like 60 stories and then open the windows so you can see down. I have a fear of heights, and you're going to drop
It's only like 10 stories. It's not that tall.
It's too many stories. Nope. I won't do it. I won't. It's every time. People are like, are you sure you don't want to go on the Tower of... And I'm like, yes! Absolutely positive. Rock and Roller Coaster line is really long. It's an indoor roller coaster set to Aerosmith. Let's get there. Also, we got to get to Universal so I can ride the Mummy at least like 9 times.
Yeah, I want to redo all that stuff because it's all changed so much since 95. And
it really has.
I was so young. There's a lot that I don't remember. Someday I'll get back down there. But let's jump into today's case, because this actually takes place in 94. So kind of around the same time I was there.
I'm so excited to not know anything.
I had a lot of debates on whether I was actually going to cover this case or not. It takes place in southeastern Wisconsin in 94. And there is a ton of coverage on just one part of the story. But everything that led up to this one part and everything that kind of happened after this one part was really hard to find.
I hate that.
So I dug super deep. I've been working on this case for weeks. This is probably the most in-depth I've gone trying to find information. I didn't find a lot of what I really wanted.
Yeah.
So it's going to be an interesting one. Unfortunately, there are still going to be missing pieces. But I think the coverage that we
yeah.
do have is enough to have a really good conversation and an interesting conversation from it.
Yeah.
There's still a lot to
when that
this.
happens.
This would have been a multi-parter for sure if I could find like the early on information and then more in-depth trial information. It'd be a whole different story.
Right. I hate that when the article is just all the crime, and then no follow-up at all. And you're like, okay, well, what happened then?
The thing is, it's not all the crime. There were other crimes here I couldn't find the information on. And it's like you can see like a sentence in each article being like referencing it, but it's like, tell me more. I need dates. I need like we'll get into it. But
okay, yes. I
had to dig deep for the information that we do have. But there's going to be one point we're going to have a video, so you guys recommend checking out that in the links. Kelly, I have a link for you in the script. So just
that will be on our TikTok as well.
Yes. Yeah. And it's just a short video. We'll get more into it. There's other stuff that you can check out with it if you're interested in more. I'm just gonna put like I think it's like 1.5 minutes of what I'm gonna choose to show. But we'll get into that as we get there.
Sure. Yeah, we'll get there.
But we're actually going to jump right into the crime. And it's on April 29th, 1994 in Wales, Wisconsin. And started at 9:30 a.m. with a bank robbery. James Oswald and his 19-year-old son, Theodore Oswald, he went by Ted. They robbed Bank 1, which is now known as U.S. Bank.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, so first thing in the morning, robbing the bank.
Uh-oh, yeah. First thing in the morning, robbing U.S. Bank.
Yep.
That ain't good.
So they managed to leave Bank 1 with $14,000, but officers Thomas Fletcher, Thomas Dooling, and Captain James Lutz were right behind them. And I believe there was 2 cop cars. They might have been like the 3 police officers would have been in 2 cop cars, potentially 3, but definitely at least 2.
Yeah.
That's part of like what wasn't clear.
Yeah, they need backup for a bank robbery like that.
And they'll have it. They're just the 3 first officers to get there.
Right.
And James and Ted had a getaway vehicle that was all ready for them at the bank after the robbery. And so the father-son pair took off in the vehicle. And during the robbery, they both were wearing white masks to help disguise themselves and a lot of really baggy clothing. So no one could really tell who they were during the robbery.
Yeah.
But
the baggy clothes.
Yeah, the baggy clothes. And it was like, it kind of looked like, the pictures are very grainy, so it's hard to tell, but kind of like a white ski mask. Maybe something that's like a little thinner than that. Maybe not a thick knit, but kind of that shape where it's a little baggy on their face, really shows no features. And they obviously figured out pretty quickly that they were caught by the cops. And a chase ensued.
Oh, even worse.
Oh, just wait. This truly gets
so far
crazy.
It's 9:30 a.m. We've robbed U.S. Bank, and we are leading the cops on a car chase.
Yep.
Just checking in.
But what they choose to do at this point is, instead of attempting to continue to flee and hopefully lose the police, they stopped their car and started to open fire on the 3 officers.
It gets worse.
Oh, it will continue. Officer Doomling recalls hearing the bullets whizzing past his head, and they're hitting his car. They're hitting the interior of his car, and he does end up getting shot in the thigh during this. So
Oh my God.
he's just trying to protect himself at this point.
Yeah.
Officer Fletcher,
Yeah.
he had the ability to stop, get out of his car, and duck behind his engine block. And so he could then start to fire back at the Oswalds.
Right.
And while Fletcher was doing this, he saw Captain Lutz's car kind of make this jerking movement. And this is when one of the Oswalds had shot and killed the police captain.
No.
Yeah. So at this point, they stop firing, they stole an abandoned car, and drive off.
Okay, I need
And this is
recap
like
because
10 a.m. by this point.
yeah, we're like 3 paragraphs in, and I need another recap because
A lot's happened.
because I really liked Officer Fletcher for some reason, and he's captain. And when he got shot in the thigh, I was like,
Lutz is captain.
Oh, okay.
Fletcher is, I think he's a deputy. But all these cops are doing what they need to do.
I really like Fletcher, and when I heard he got shot in the thigh, I was like, oh no, I hope he survived.
It wasn't Fletcher who got shot in the thigh. Fletcher didn't get shot.
God damn it.
Like, there's 3 cops here. Doomling gets shot in the thigh.
Dueling.
And then...
So I really liked Dueling, and when I heard he got shot in the thigh, I was like, oh no, I hope he survived. And then now one of the cops is dead.
Yeah, the police captain, James Lutz.
That is exactly what I was hoping you weren't going to say.
Mm-hmm.
Also, we stole an abandoned car.
Yeah.
That too.
So
not as important, but still.
I questioned it being abandoned because
think they took it.
I think this is small town Wisconsin in the mid '90s. Someone left their keys in their car outside their house. That's just my theory, but I grew up in Wisconsin. That was pretty normal behavior for a very long time.
I just can't believe they killed the police captain. They are in so much trouble.
Yeah, and with killing Captain Lutz, I saw a couple reports on how they killed him, which I find really interesting because only a couple reports reported it, but one of them was like the main reporter in all of this. They basically said he was shot execution style.
Oh my God.
I think honestly, I think that might be a slight exaggeration. I think that they probably were very close and knew that they were going to kill him with that shot. But not necessarily close enough to be considered specifically execution style. But their goal clearly were to shoot and kill.
Right. Wow.
Yeah. So more police are on their way. And it was either Fletcher or Dumoulin, I don't really know. They were able to report into dispatch to say that Dumoulin had been shot along with Lutz. I'm not sure if they exactly knew that Lutz had been killed at this point, but they minimally knew shot. So they're just trying to get as much information out over the radio and get as much response as they possibly could at this point.
Right.
And for some reason that I don't know, and I don't fully understand, the Oswalds abandoned the car that they stole. I'm assuming they got slightly far enough away that they were kind of out of visuals of the cops and wanted to switch cars again.
Yeah, maybe they thought they'd get caught or something.
That's my thought. I don't really know. But at this point, they run across the field and they spot a woman named Joy Opat. And Joy was on her porch. She lived in Pewaukee, which is a neighboring town to Wales where the bank robbery happened. And she started hearing a ton of sirens in the area and then saw these two men running across this field. And she runs back into her house, closes all the doors, locks them.
Good.
So she did the right thing. But unfortunately, the Oswalds were able to make their way into her house. And
oh my God.
as officers approached Joy's home, because they saw this as well across the field, shots started coming from inside the home. And it was towards police.
Oh my God.
Right? So I'm like, I know you don't know this one, but it's crazy when we get into these details.
Yeah, I don't know this one, but like, this is nuts.
Oh yeah, it's gonna continue. It's not gonna end.
I'm not gonna ask the question yet because I'm sure you'll get to it. But it's one of those things that makes you wonder, like, what happened to these men?
Oh, we'll get there. We'll get there.
I thought we would.
So they make her way into the home. There's now a second shootout, and one of the bullets shattered the glass patio door. And as this happened, James, Ted, and Joy ran out to Joy's van to make another escape attempt.
Okay.
And this is a fairly small town in Wisconsin. Wales and Pewaukee are kind of outer suburbs of Milwaukee, about 20 miles away from the city. And so like there's some population, but they're not big towns or big suburbs by any means. And
right.
So with like, and this is also, remember, this is the mid-90s. So these officers are calling to dispatch over the radios about the shootout, saying that 2 officers have been shot. And many of us who are interested in true crime know that news stations often listen to police scanners. And this is exactly what was happening. And it's to respond as quickly as possible and get it on the news. And local station WISN 12 heard this all on the radio and sent news reporter Renee Riddle and photographer cameraman Bob Vermiglio out to the scene so that they can start reporting live on everything that was happening.
Oh my God.
And they did not expect that they were going to get the footage that they got and report it live on TV.
I was going to say, this sounds really bad.
Yeah. So when Renee and Bob left the news station, they really knew very little. They knew that an officer had been shot. And what they didn't know is that they had arrived before the police would be able to make a barricade.
Oh,
and that they would actually catch the third shootout of the morning on camera and broadcast it live.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
That's like, I know we've talked about it before, but Ash having to be on the radio and announce 9/11, like, that's kind of what it feels like. Like, there's a live shootout happening.
Luckily, she was able to be, like, in her booth and not have it be feet in front of her. But imagine in both of those scenarios, just the panic and, like, your heart racing while you're trying to report the news.
And stay alive.
So, James and Ted and Joy are still in Joy's van. And at this point, the police had set up 2 cars to kind of be a roadblock. And her van was one of those really big kind of cargo-style family vans from the 90s. I'm not sure if you really remember those. They had like the big top on.
Oh, I do.
And so these two little cars were just kind of blocking the road, but that thing's like a beast to drive through that. And it was at this point that Joy was driving. And Joy was forcibly involved in all of this. She didn't want to do this. She was kidnapped, and they forced her to drive her own car as their escape.
I was going to say, I'm willing to bet Joy didn't want to drive.
Poor Joy. And at this point, too, she had been shot. I don't know exactly when she was shot. I believe it was like in the shootout of trying to get to the car.
Right. So this is just a very scary situation for her.
Oh, yeah. Like, she tried to block up her house. Like, she saw these men running and heard a ton of sirens. She tried to lock her doors and, like, keep them out, but they forced their way in and kidnapped her.
She did everything. Like we often say, she did everything she was supposed to do.
Oh, she's going to continue to do everything. Once she approached this roadblock of these two cars, she took this as her opportunity to jump out of the van.
Good call.
She was able to escape. She jumped out. This is all on video, because this is what was caught by the news. She jumped out of the van, dove in between the two cars that were in the middle of the street, and I don't know, I think it was Ted hopped in the driver's seat and started driving the van and actually hit one of the roadblock cars and spun it around, blasting through it.
Jesus.
Like, there's a link right below this paragraph where we're talking right now. Click on that. That is the live footage of
Okay, I can't wait to see this.
Yeah, why don't you narrate it as you're watching it? Because
okay, I will.
It's only a minute and a half.
I was gonna say, hold on, I'm watching this like right now.
I'm not sure if the sound will play. It's fine if it does. I'll figure out the editing. You'll hear all the shots that were fired, which is a ton.
I would like to hear that.
Yeah, I would play the sound then.
Unfortunately, there's no subtitles available in this video.
There's no words.
Oh, well. Oh, dear. Okay, so I'm about to press play.
All right.
Here we go, everybody. Okay, we're running. I see the barricade.
Yeah, so it's just like two cars in the middle of the road.
And shots. Holy shit, that's so many shots.
It's like there's a lot of shots fired.
It's been 15 seconds. Oh my god. Another huge volley. 21 seconds.
And you see like the door open and someone kind of run behind that car. That's Joy.
Okay, that just happened. Go Joy.
And she almost got hit by that second car because of the way that they spun it. And then you see like the guns coming out of that van. Like they are so loaded with weapons in there.
Wow. Also, is this the getaway car that just hit a tree?
Yep. Yeah, so once Ted hops in the car and blows through that police barricade, he's flying down the road and he completely loses control of the van and smashes. I don't know what speed he was going. It was pretty fast. He got about 300 yards from that barricade to hit that tree.
Fast. I mean, I'm a bad driver too. But, like, if you're trying to get away from the cops, you should pay more attention to where the trees are.
Yeah, there's, like, a small cluster of trees. It was pretty open.
And I'm with you just repeating what you were saying in that video was so short and so many shots were fired. Mm-hmm. So many shots. Like, I can't believe it. Like, they're armed to the teeth.
Oh, yeah. They had so many weapons with them. And we'll get into them doing the search of their home and stuff just shortly here. They had so many more.
Sure.
So many more.
Oh
they had like an armory. Yeah. So they crashed the car. And They literally get about 300 yards, according to what I think it was the cameraman kind of estimated it, that from that roadblock to hit that tree, 300 yards.
Yeah, they did not get far.
No. But at this point, both Ted and James are injured. But they are also still heavily armed, as we were saying. And it took another 2 hours to get both men out of that van and into police custody. And the way that they did this was they brought in the SWAT team. And this is Wisconsin. We have massive snowplows up there.
Right.
And so they got one of the like highway snowplows that's absolutely huge. And the SWAT team hid behind that while pulling up really close to the van so that they could have that like solid metal barrier between them, because they didn't know what these guys were truly armed with. Yeah, it worked. It definitely worked. But imagine like being whoever's driving that snowplow. Like, I'm sure it was a SWAT team member. Like, it had to be law enforcement. But it's like, y'all get to stand over there.
So. I hope so. I hope it wasn't just like a plowman that they called.
No, it's not a city worker. No way. This is probably, I don't know the exact times of the day, but saying that it's 2 hours after they crashed, they probably, I can't imagine they crashed any later than like 10:30, from robbing the bank to 2 shootouts to kidnapping Joy to crashing. Couldn't have been more than an hour.
Jesus.
So
busy morning.
Yeah, like that all happened so incredibly fast. So
what the fuck?
Yeah. So both men suffered non-fatal wounds from the crash. Ted had a broken ankle and thigh, multiple lacerations, and James had a broken arm, leg, thumb, a dislocated shoulder, and multiple facial lacerations. Neither of them were shot. So, just injuries from the crash.
Ridiculous. Well, I mean, not that I'm pro getting people shot, but like, if anybody deserves it.
It sounds like underneath their baggy clothes, they were wearing bulletproof vests.
Oh.
I think that's one of those things I saw reported in one article, but none of the others. But given what we're going to be talking about with their armory and their house, I understand how they potentially would be. So I'm not sure if they were, but I get it.
It makes sense. If they're that willing to risk a shootout with the police, they must have some insurance.
Yeah. I also saw in a report in a Waukesha paper, the Freeman, that mentioned another officer being shot in the knee. This is the only place I saw this. So I don't know if there was a third officer who was shot. But potentially, I wouldn't necessarily surprise me with how many bullets were being shot between everyone.
Yeah.
And this is the point where the research got quite difficult. Mm-hmm. Usually, I like to begin our episodes with kind of a backstory, get to know the people involved, most specifically the victims. And this was so difficult to do in this case, specifically with Captain James Lutz. As I mentioned earlier, Lutz was shot and killed during the first shootout. What I do know is that James Lutz was 57 years old when he was murdered. He was married with 2 sons. And he had been on the Waukesha police force for 29 years. And according to the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, he is credited in forming Waukesha's first SWAT team. So SWATs who responded, and SWATs who got them out of that car and got them into custody.
Wow. So he wasn't just an average police chief.
No, he did a lot for his community. And like he is accredited in making that SWAT team, which I think is a big deal, and I think that's it's not meant to be, but that's kind of a way to honor him, to acknowledge that, because like by the 90s, the area probably would have had a SWAT team. It was a big enough area right outside of Milwaukee, but being the officer who like fought for it and brought it in, that's a big deal.
I believe that. Yeah, I believe so too. Because I mean, Joy could have died without.
Oh yeah, easily. Unfortunately, luckily she didn't, and luckily there were people there who were trained in this matter because of hardworking officers like James Lutz.
Yes, exactly.
But unfortunately, that's all I could really find out about James. Kind of ends there. We also have very little information when it comes to James and Ted Oswald, but we do have a bit more. And one of the most frustrating pieces in all of this was the missing information on the crime timeline. Because this was not their first bank robbery. They had committed many bank robberies in both Wisconsin and Indiana. Yeah. Wow. This is why I was getting so frustrated during my research, because it's like, I don't know where, like, exactly where these bank robberies took place. I don't know when they took place. I don't know how much money they got, because clearly they got away. Like, I know none of that information. And it drives me nuts. I dug so deep to find this, but I saw references where it's like 4 other bank robberies in Wisconsin, 1 in Indiana. And then I'd read another article that said they did 3 others in total, and nothing was consistent. It just said other robberies.
That's
so
wild.
You guys are all on the same page as me now, and probably as frustrated.
Yeah.
I was like calling people I know who, like, for example, my sister, she knows a lot of the government websites as a first responder. She's had to kind of go through them before. And I'm asking her, I'm like, what help me? Like, you know these sites better than I do. Because a lot of it's like legal jargon. It has like weird ways to search and filter. I'm like, I need help.
Right.
And we couldn't find anything.
Right.
Like, I brought in recruits for this and didn't find anything.
I phoned a friend and we still didn't find anything.
Like, I did find information. She was a huge help to me in particular with some of the Wisconsin court documents and stuff. But it just, nothing. No articles reported it. I saw a ton of old clippings of newspapers. I was all over the place.
That is crazy.
Yeah.
That is crazy that that just sort of disappeared.
Yeah.
Off their record.
Yeah, I don't know. But before I dive a little deeper into their trials, which is where we're going to find more out about their history, I do find it a little bit entertaining that there was a police sketch that I saw on WISN 12, and they're the same news station that got the whole footage of the shootout. So they were kind of the main reporters covering every detail of this. But they had a police sketch from one of the other bank robberies that they're attributing to James and Ted. And the sketch looks just like D.B. Cooper. I'm just like, really? Like, they're not D.B. Cooper.
Be robbing banks. D.B. Cooper but also, it's funny because they're like, it's cool. They've been robbing banks for a long time. We already have the mugshots.
Yeah, they have, and the sketch looks nothing like either of them. But, like, to me, it's like someone's like, oh, draw me a sketch of D.B. Cooper. That's what it looked like.
Right.
But, so, like, obviously, they're not D.B. Cooper. Like, no way. But there is a lot of speculation that they may be connected to some other big names in the crime world. And these are people that you do not want to be connected with. So, we'll get to all of that kind of as we go here. But yeah, we're going to be bringing up some pretty big things from the 90s.
Oh my.
So during the trial, we learned a lot about the family dynamic of the Oswalds.
Oh, okay, this better be good.
You know, it's not, but it makes more sense a little bit.
No, I just mean like it better make sense as to why they're out here killing cops.
Oh, you will never properly.
Banks.
We'll never fully understand because our brains can't work that way, thankfully. But you're going to be angry. You're definitely going to be angry as we continue to talk. But they lived in Watertown, Wisconsin, which is about 40 miles west of where the final shootout took place in Pewaukee. And James and Ted lived in a converted barn. And from the sound of it, they had quite a bit of land. Like, it was this pretty decent
They were on farmland.
Yes. And this whole area, a lot of this area is farmland. So that's kind of not surprising. But they lived in this, it looked like a pretty good-sized converted barn. And Ted would attend Watertown High School before he would end up dropping out. And James was an accountant. It sounds like James may have moved around the country.
Wait.
Yeah. He was an accountant.
He's an accountant?
Mm-hmm.
Sorry I keep stopping you, but he's an accountant.
Yeah, no,
so
he's an
you're
accountant.
robbing banks.
Yep. Well, what's kind of funny about this, and my family actually thought that they knew somebody who worked with James. That's how I heard about this case.
Oh.
My dad called me, and he's like, I just thought of one that you need to cover on the show. And it's a neighbor of when I was a little kid. They lived next door to me, and the husband of the couple was an accountant and previously had worked with another accountant who was a bank robber. So I just started Googling. Like, we didn't know names. We didn't know any additional details. So I just started Googling accountant robbing banks mid-90s. Like, just trying to find something. And I found this case. So we weren't sure if they're connected and if my neighbor actually worked with James. The more we talk about it, we don't think they're the same person. So we think that there's another accountant who was robbing banks. But I'm just like, I can't not do this story with how crazy everything is, even though it wasn't what I originally thought it was going to be.
It's just another accountant robbing banks.
Right? But let's get back to the Oswald family dynamic. It doesn't sound like Ted's mother, Susan Williams, was in the picture much. I've seen a couple articles where she was interviewed, but she was divorced from James, and James had full custody of Ted.
Oh, okay.
And so I'm very curious about this and what happened between the two of them, because it isn't very common, especially at this point. This would have been the 80s, to have children granted full custody to the father. But
primary custody of the father.
It's weird, but at the same time, it was a very tumultuous custody battle. And Ted has an older sister and a younger sister. Ted and his older sister went to live with James, and the younger sister went to go live with Susan. So she still did get custody of one of her kids, but the other two. So I don't know if there was like a choice given to the kids or what.
I do know sometimes that happens.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking, because it was like the youngest went to go live with her while the two oldest went to go live with James. But they were still pretty young at the time. And when they divorced, I believe they were in California, and then James moved to Wisconsin. Or they were in Wisconsin, and then Susan moved to California. I'm not entirely sure. I just know that they ended up on the other side of the country from each other.
Right. They ended up in Wisconsin.
Yeah, they I'm not, yeah, they could have grown up there. But either way,
Yeah.
both parents,
Regardless,
other
they ended up
sides.
there.
Yeah. And I believe in all likelihood it was that they moved from California to Wisconsin, because I did see some articles that mentioned James potentially working as an accountant in California. So that's my guess. Could be wrong.
Okay.
And Susan would come out to say that she and Ted were both abused by James. She didn't mention her daughters being abused by James.
By James. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So I'm not sure if the daughters also weren't abused, or if just the context of the conversation, because it was in trial, was referencing just the two of them. And the other two weren't really talked about because they weren't the ones on trial. I don't know. But.
Right. So there's a possibility that he, in fact, did abuse them.
Yeah, we just don't really know. We'll hear some things from the older daughter coming up here. I have a few quotes, and she was interviewed a little bit. So I do have some things from her accounts of what happened. But according to Susan, James was, quote, training Ted. And
training Ted.
Yeah. And according to her, we'll get there.
Okay, sorry.
We'll get there, because that's a whole big part of the conversation. But according to her, part of this training actually meant that Susan was not able to see her son. And James wouldn't allow Susan to see Ted after 1989. So by the time this shootout happens, she hadn't seen her son in 5 years.
Oh my God.
And then, the last time she saw him, he would have only been 14 years old. So,
right.
Like I said,
she might not even know what he looks like.
Yeah, and obviously they're on the other side of the country, as we mentioned, but I don't know if there was some custody thing where she just was not, that was totally fine, that she could never see him and she was denied access to see her son. I don't really know. I don't know if things were different at that time, or just because of the fact they were on different sides of the country, it made it hard for them. I'm honestly not too sure. And I also would like to note that I don't know where Ted's sister was at the time of the robberies. She did, at least at some point, live on that barn property with her dad and her brother. But she was not mentioned in any way, shape, or form as involved in this. So I'm assuming she potentially moved out. She would have been probably in her early 20s, because Ted was 19 when this happened.
Right.
So
right.
I don't really know. She did come forward and talk a little bit later, but from what I can tell, it was very limited what she was saying.
She may have been.
It might have been in court and quoted from court more than anything.
Yeah. She may have been fleeing abuse.
She easily could have been. Because it sounds like, even though there's no reports of him abusing either of his daughters, minimally they were emotionally abused just by what was happening in the home, whether it was directed towards them or not.
Yeah.
And she had some very sad things to say that we'll get to. So Susan also said that James was incredibly selfish, and he would prefer to put his kids in danger before himself. And she referred to him as the, quote, ultimate coward and a, quote, emotional terrorist.
Wow.
Yeah. She recalls
Vivid.
she does not think highly of him, and you know what, neither do I.
Right,
so.
I was gonna say, so that marriage didn't work out so hot.
No, definitely not. She recalls instances where James would send his kids into the home before him so that they could, quote, check for intruders before he entered the home.
Oh my God!
So, you know, if there's an intruder in my home who wants to harm me, kill me or something, let my little kid go first.
Right, I should send my kid in.
Come on.
Are you kidding me? Like,
Yeah.
I'm not a parent and I've never wanted to be a parent, but I still know that you shouldn't send your kid in to check for intruders.
Yeah, no, not a good thing. And his oldest daughter would kind of say a very similar story in some of her news coverage. And she also talked about the trauma that she still suffers from her childhood with James. She talks about how she's triggered during movies a lot and things that are just meant to be entertainment because it reminds her of her childhood. And she specifically references the movie The Butterfly Effect. And there is a scene, I think it's fairly on in the movie. It's been years since I've seen it, but one of the characters puts a dog in a burlap sack and sets it on fire.
Oh God! Wait, I think I remember that.
It's the worst scene in the movie, in my opinion. I've always hated that scene. And alone, just in the movie, that's traumatizing. Like that's one of those scenes that like I'll just skip to the next scene. I don't need to see that again.
Right.
And she recalls.
I'm good.
Yeah, she recalls times of like when she'd be at home and her farm cats would quote disappear, and that's really kind of what she believed was happening to her farm animals. And
that
I don't want to get into some of the details. There's some
them?
other things. Killing them very brutally. I'm not going to get into any details, but I watched an article. I watched a news clip with James where he talked about what he would do to some of the animals on the farm. And it just made my stomach turn. It was awful. And it's out of his own mouth saying what he would do to them. I won't tell you. You all don't need to hear it. It's not necessary.
But, oh my God. But oh my God.
So like,
just being willing to own that on TV.
We'll talk about his interview. That's kind of the end that I have here because it was actually the last thing I did in my research was watch this interview. And it's just like, I don't like the man. To put it simply, I don't like him.
I don't like him. Yeah, no.
Yeah, and the oldest daughter also said that James also viewed Ted as his, quote, chance to create a superior being. And that's a really good way to put it with some of the stuff that came out during trial.
Okay.
So, jumping kind of to the investigation part of it. Arrests are made. Investigators are starting to search the Watertown property and the farm. And they find a lot of incriminating information. They found writings of what I think were mostly, if not all, written by James. Ted could have been definitely part of it, but I think this was a driving force of James. And as the Chicago Tribune puts it, quote, they had stitched together a far-right anti-government creed.
Oh, help us.
Yeah, so we just took a whole nother turn here. And they drew from multiple ideologies, such as Norse mythology, Odinism, and Nietzsche's Superman theory. Yeah.
Okay.
So they essentially believed that they had to take whatever they wanted so that they wouldn't become, quote, slaves. They thought people who just kind of followed the rules and lived their life like the normal person were slaves to the society and slaves to government. And if they wanted to break away from that, they just had to take whatever they wanted. And if that meant casualties, that meant casualties. You got to fight against the people who are structuring our government and economy and everything.
Have taken an oath to serve and protect you.
Yeah. So they believed that their, quote, full potential and by full potential, they mean robbing banks. They could avoid becoming, quote, disarmed peasants. So they needed money and guns, is what they wanted. And they thought the government was essentially grooming people to become these disarmed peasants so that the government can control the human population to be their slaves. And like,
wow, okay.
Yeah, he truly believed all of this. He refers to himself in these writings as a grandson of liberty. And he thought it was his duty to take down the government. Right?
You might have to cut this part too, but speaking of liberty, I did get my Lady Justice tattoo, and she does not approve.
No, not at all. So on the farm that James owned, they lived their lives every day, just living their lives in military fatigues. They were completely treating their home as if it were a military base. They found the armory, which was completely decked out, and the Chicago Tribune refers to the army as sophisticated and included a custom 50 caliber rifles, and apparently these rifles were strong enough to take down an armored car, which was apparently one of their next plans for one of their bank robberies.
Oh.
So yeah,
great plan, guys.
Yeah. They also practiced their plans on their farmland, essentially setting up an obstacle course.
This is...
Yeah.
This is... Wait, did his parents live with him?
Ted? Ted lived with James.
Either of them.
James is the dad.
Ted lived with James.
James is 40, late 40s maybe? I think he was 49 when he was arrested.
How did they let this happen?
I don't know. And that's why I'm wondering everything with the divorce. I know up until all of this, they both had a clean record. Neither of them had criminal records. James was an accountant. It kind of sounds like he jumped around with jobs fairly frequently, but that was also kind of hard to tell. I couldn't even find if he was currently working at the time of the robberies. I just saw that he was an accountant.
At one point.
So a common concern when these sort of extreme anti-government ideas are discovered is if more people are involved. And if James and Ted potentially could be part of a militia.
Right.
And especially considering the fact that James and Ted had committed armed bank robberies. There are so many examples of different militia groups who commit bank robberies as part of their mission because they need funding.
And they're so well armed.
Yes. And so it's a big question if the two of them are doing this alone or with a whole nother group of people. Mm-hmm. And many of the details are still fuzzy. As I said, I'm trying to do my best with these details, but it was very difficult. It is believed that they robbed 4 banks. This is kind of the most consistent information I found, is 4 banks in Wisconsin and 1 in Indiana as part of this anti-government agenda. So it doesn't say anywhere when these robberies were committed or if it was only 2 people robbing the banks, if they could tell if there were more people involved. Like, it just says they're tied to these bank robberies. So who really knows? But the same Tribune article that I've been mentioning in my last couple notes here says that those robberies, all of the money was accounted for with the exception of $40,000. So
interesting.
Yeah, like, again, it's not a whole lot of information. I'm just trying to give you guys everything I could find. But we're unsure where that $40,000 went. We don't know if it was spent on their guns and like everything. Who really knows? Or if it was given to another militia group as funding. Like, I don't know.
I was gonna say, I bet $40,000 will buy you a lot of guns.
Yeah, a whole lot of guns, especially in the 90s.
Yeah, it's the 90s.
So during jury selection, this was about a year after the robberies that this went to trial. James would capitalize on this theory, and I guess at one point he mentioned that the police had a photo of him and Timothy McVeigh, the Oklahoma City bomber, together at a shooting range in Arkansas. Just this photo of the two of them together. And this is James like saying this, I think, to the news, that he knows the police have this photo. And this made this was like big news in Wisconsin of like, oh my God, is this guy tied to Timothy McVeigh? And this made investigators and the public wonder if he actually could have been involved with McVeigh or planning the Oklahoma City bombings. So what if he was somehow just involved or like knew about it or had connections to McVeigh? Something. Yeah. And the Oklahoma City bombings would actually happen only about 2 weeks after jury selection. So could James have actually been talking to McVeigh, but then was locked up for a year before the bombings? Maybe. Yeah. Like, they're looking into all of this. Eventually, investigators would come out and they would say that, like, we don't know what photo he's talking about. Like, we have no clue what he's referencing.
We don't know
who knows if the photo was real? The police could have said that anyway. I don't really know.
True.
But James would also talk about his admiration for Robert J. Matthews, who was a leader in a group called the Order. He was a neo-Nazi, and the Order was a white supremacist militant group in Washington State. I'm not going to get into all the details of the Order. If that's something you are interested in, let us know, because that is easily a whole episode on its own. And just on Robert J. Matthews, because that man's crazy.
He'd be nuts.
So some of the, when I was reading for just this little next part that I'm going to talk about, I was just like, I immediately debated starting another episode about him. But I don't know if I want to do that much white supremacist research in that short of a time.
Right. I can't believe that he would brag about being associated with him, especially when he's like under trial.
This is his idol. Robert J. Matthews is his number one idol in the world.
That is so wild.
Yeah. Well, just wait till you hear some of the details about this man. So essentially,
imagine telling people that.
Oh, I know. I'm doing all this research, and I was on the phone with my sister because, like, obviously I cover a lot of Wisconsin cases, and one of the other like really big cases that was really important to me to cover was the tree stand murders. And
yes,
in that episode we talked about the KKK and a lot of racial issues. And that was hard to research because I was like, that's my home. Like, Wisconsin's my home.
Right.
I was like, I hate reading this stuff. But it unfortunately happens everywhere. Right. It's just like, I want the pride in like my home state of like, we don't do this, but you know what? I'm telling you, Wisconsin does. At least parts of Wisconsin does. Some people in Wisconsin do.
Yeah. It unfortunately, it's like it happens everywhere, but you never want to believe it about like your own hometown.
Yeah.
Would be so.
Honestly, it'd be a whole lot different too. Like, our story today takes place in the 90s. it'd be a whole lot easier to believe like that's in the past if I didn't literally live by them. Like, I've seen the KKK. I've known people.
Oh my God.
Who have been in the KKK.
Oh my God.
I hate it. I truly wish I didn't have association with anyone in it. But when you grow up in a tiny town where it does exist, like, you don't, there are times where it's like you find out someone's part of it well after you know them. It's like,
right, exactly. You don't get to choose when they bring it up.
yeah, and I'm a very, very strong believer in you and I can have 100% different opinions, but can we respect each other? If we can do that, we're fine. And
right,
I've had this conversation a lot with people in my life where they're like polar opposites, like politically, for example. People are like, I don't want to associate with them because they're so this direction. And I'm just like, do they respect you?
Right.
Like, are they actually being, like, truly disrespectful to you, or you just not agree with some of what they believe?
Yeah.
I think
do they respect you? Do you like them? Do they make you laugh? Well, then fucking deal with it.
I think there's a major importance in having people of different opinions around you constructively. I think that's how our government is supposed to work. You need all sides coming together for a common understanding, and you can only do that if you are around each other. So, like, it's a whole different thing when you kind of learn something that is so against your morals, like so deeply against your morals. We're like, oh shoot, like how do I react to this?
Yeah. Right. What now?
Right?
What the fresh hell?
So, with Robert J. Matthews, James's idol, and he had the order. And the order was fairly well known. It was very short-lived, and it essentially made its money by robbing banks. And
sure.
It had this whole list of enemies. And one thing we do know is the order killed at least one person, Alan Burke. He was number 2 on their kill list, and he was murdered on December 7th, 1984. Wait, no.
Oh my God.
He wasn't murdered then. He was just murdered at some point. I didn't include that in here. But he was definitely murdered by the order, and this was part of their big plan. On December 7th in 1984, authorities surrounded Matthews's home, and this turned into a major standoff that lasted over 24 hours. So on late December 8th, so over 24 hours after the standoff had started, officers would shoot 3 flares into his home from a helicopter. One of these flares hit a box of grenades that caused his house to catch on fire. And Matthews would die in this house fire with the gun still in his hand. And this was James Oswald's hero. He described him as a, quote, a bright flame that burned briefly.
I was just going to say, like, wow, died with the gun in your hand. You're a big man, huh?
Yeah.
And this is this guy's hero.
Mm-hmm.
God.
Yeah. So, yeah, it gets better up here because this we don't know if it's true or not, but it could be. So,
it tracks.
Obviously, the police are going through every piece of evidence with a fine-tooth comb to determine whether or not they could have been involved with the militia. And they didn't find any specific evidence of this, but a man named Douglas Seymour, who is a volunteer at the Center for Democratic Renewal, which is a group that promotes democracy and a diverse society. Douglas said that James actually did have connections to a well-known Grand Dragon, or I think it's called a Grand Master now. of the KKK and the head of the White Aryan Resistance, Tom Metzger.
What?
Yeah, so this is a big name in all of that in the West Coast. He's in Southern California.
Because, like, Grand Wizard is, like, KKK guy in charge.
Yeah, it's like the, guy in charge of, like, the area, like a district manager almost, I think.
Yeah.
Like, it's not just a chapter. Like, they look over, like, a whole region.
Yeah, they're like, let's make sure this whole area is racist.
Right? And so Douglas Seymour, he had actually infiltrated and inserted himself into the extreme right-wing scene in Southern California in the 80s. And he said that in 1981, he witnessed Metzger and James Oswald meeting in a restaurant. Both men deny meeting each other. But one thing that we do know, which potentially could make their connection more understandable, is that Robert J. Matthews had given Metzger $250,000 for the KKK. So his idol is giving this other person money, for all the kind of the same reason that they're all involved in. But I would like to note with this is that this was a few years before Matthews started the order. So I'm not sure how much Oswald actually knew of Matthews at this time.
Yeah.
So again, it's possible. It's possible they worked together and would never admit it. It's possible they never met. And a big part of their beliefs, which Oswald has come out and said this very openly, that a rat will never, that in their beliefs, they will never rat on a fellow right-winged extremist. As Oswald had actually once put it in an interview, quote, it would be very dangerous. And really, the penalty, if he were to, like, actually say, like, yes, I'm connected to these people, we do this, would be death.
I was going to say, they'll kill you.
Yeah,
and
like,
also,
undoubtedly.
And also, don't get me wrong, like, I'm no rat, but if you're with the KKK, they have the witness protection program, man.
Right. But at the same time, they're, especially in this time, this would have been the 80s into the 90s. Yeah.
Oh, so not a great time.
Yeah.
To be a KKK informant.
Yeah. I honestly don't know how much I put into this meeting. James Oswald likely would have been in California at this point if they're saying that he worked as an accountant in California before the divorce, and the divorce would have happened in, I think, the mid-80s. So, like, time and place kind of makes sense, but I'm not sure if it makes sense in the political ideas, especially involving Robert J. Matthews, because the order was still years away from happening. So I don't really know, but
yeah,
possible.
Yeah. Seems like one of those things where people kind of correlate big serial killers with other big serial killers, even though the dates don't really line up. The case I'm researching right now, like, none of the dates match up.
Or even how, like, Israel Keyes is always, like, the first thought of serial killer, because he just was everywhere, regardless if he had any, like, evidence of involvement or not. Yeah. So we don't really know. And they never really found a connection to other right-wing extremists or militant groups. And they did find the details for all sorts of scenarios in their writings. So it kind of seems like it really is just the two of them.
Okay, all right.
But they planned
partners.
for different... Yes, it's just father and son. That's it. and they attempted to plan for everything. They had different escape plans. At least one of the plans included them being pursued by police and how to handle it by killing officers. Like, if they were to be pursued, their goal was to kill officers. And that's, as we can see with the 3 shootouts, seems to be what they attempted to do.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
That's insanity.
Yeah. And it makes a lot of sense when you really start to kind of think about the timeline of those shootouts, because they were in the process of actually getting away when they would stop and turn to shoot. There were multiple times that they stopped their cars to shoot versus just keep driving and maybe they could actually get away and do this again.
Right. That's what I was going to say when I watched the video, is that they made it such a short distance that I was like, why even bother trying to escape? You could have pulled it off. And
the first shootout, which wasn't caught on camera, but the first shootout, they were driving away and they stopped their car and pulled out their guns to shoot at officers. Like, they could have just kept going.
Yeah, that would have been super easy. A lot of it probably has to do with those awful alt-right beliefs that were like all sheep and like the police are out to get us.
Part of the government.
You know?
They're awful. They're the ones who are trying to control the slaves. That's
yes, yeah. We're slaves if we don't
follow
stop
the laws
and kill the cops.
Yeah.
Insanity.
It also makes sense to me why they also took a hostage and why they took Joy, because that gives them more leverage against the police.
Right.
And they just didn't count on Joy being the woman that she is and taking her chance to escape and saving herself.
They didn't think that because she was a tiny little woman, she could get away from them, and she had their number. Like,
even after being shot,
you.
She did exactly what she needed to do.
Even after being shot, fuck you, bro.
Yeah.
Wherever you're going, I ain't coming.
So most of these writings have been sealed by the court. So what I know is just kind of what came out in a couple news articles and a little bit in trial. But a lot of the trial, because it featured a lot of the writings, is also sealed. So that's also where my frustration came in trying to do the research. But one thing that we did find out is that they actually had plans to kidnap Warren Buffett, who even at that time in the mid-90s was a billionaire. And I don't know what their plans were. They just apparently had plans.
Yeah, their plans.
Like, I don't know how successful that was going to be.
Right.
I
Plan
assume
one.
it was just money related, but I don't know. I who knows what they were going to do.
Baffled. Plan
I also
one,
can't imagine this is
Warren.
the first time someone attempted to want to kidnap Warren Buffett due to his wealth. I'm sure that he probably has a lot of security and protection around him.
I'm pretty sure. And also just like plan number 1, let's kidnap Warren Buffett.
Right.
Like, what?
So when it came to the trial, James did something that doesn't surprise me. But it was a really bad decision on his part. He represented himself.
Oh, I love it when they do that.
Right. There were quite a few articles when, what's his name, who is the monster who drove through the parade in Waukesha or Kenosha. I don't know his name. He represented himself in court a couple years ago. And there were a lot of articles because I think they're in the same county. So the DA was like reflecting on Oswald representing himself when they found out that what's his name was going to represent himself recently.
Wow.
Yeah.
I love when they represent themselves because you just know you're like, they're so screwed.
Well, what he does too is just like, he's such a terrible person and a disgusting person. He fired his lawyer before jury selection. He thought he was smarter, he could do it himself.
Sure,
Whatever.
he's a sociopath, yeah.
Yeah, and the former DA said that he would taunt Captain Lutz's widow by blowing her kisses and winking at her. It's awful. It's on video. I watched it. It's disgusting.
Oh my god, this man better be in jail or I'm gonna put him there.
Oh, we'll get there. That's coming up very soon, and you'll be a happy person.
I'm gonna put that, I am going to light that bitch on fire.
I'll tell you, he's in the same jail as where Dahmer was.
Ha! Wisconsin justice system.
Right. Yeah,
him!
so we'll get to his sentencing in just a moment. But he also claimed that he didn't murder Captain Lutz. Instead, Lutz died as a result of friendly fire. That's his argument. When there are a couple reports that have made it clear that he shot him from close range and compared it to execution style.
Right.
So his response is friendly fire.
But he died of friendly fire.
Yeah. So he was facing a total of 20 charges, which included robbery by use or threat of a deadly weapon, auto theft, taking hostages, first-degree recklessly endangering safety, and first-degree homicide.
They're all true, but, there's so many.
Well, a lot of them were, duplicates, too, because it's they stole multiple cars. They did things. So, I'm going through the Wisconsin Circuit Court website, reading every single one of his charges. And also, there were no articles that said, his total sentence of, everything he received. So I had to go one by one on the Wisconsin Circuit Court website and count up every single one of his charges.
Oh, my God.
Obnoxious.
Which must have taken about 20 years.
Right. But when asked in a 2005 interview about what James would say to Captain Lutz's wife, he said that he would tell her it's a shame that this dog and pony show has to go on. That's his response. He's been in jail for 10 years, and he's still saying this dog and pony show went on after he murdered her husband.
I hope that this guy gets stabbed up in jail just like Dahmer.
I was gonna say, he's in the same place as Dahmer.
I do. That's dark and awful of me to think, but I hope he gets stabbed just like Dahmer, because he's blowing kisses at her and calling her husband's court case a dog and pony show.
Mm-hmm.
Sir,
the interviewer asked him very specifically why he blew kisses at her and winked at her, and he acted as if he had absolutely no memory of this. And he kind of just sat there and slightly smirked to himself, and he said that would have been pretty cruel. And it's you did it. Wow. I watched it. I saw it on camera.
Right. I saw it on camera, you psychopath.
Yeah, and then near the end of the interview asked him if he is a cold, heartless killer, flat out. Are you a cold, heartless killer?
Fair question.
James responded, probably not, and then giggled, and then went into some philosophical, how do you define a cold, heartless killer?
Oh my God. Oh my God.
Right?
Sir, I didn't ask you for a soliloquy. I asked you if you murdered anyone.
Yeah. So, as I said, I struggled to find the sentencing. So when I added everything up, he was sentenced to a whole total of 823 years for those 20 different charges against him.
Oh, you're right. I'm so happy.
I'm like, I know you'll like to hear that one.
You're right. I'm so happy. Again, I don't want to be evil and hateful, but this is a police chief's widow who he is blowing kisses at and denying he ever did it. And then I hope he bleeds out in his cell.
Yeah. So he's staying there forever.
Yeah. Real long time.
And I've spent a lot of time talking about James. So let's quickly shift to Ted. Ted clearly was involved in all of the same things as his father. But the question is whether Ted did this because he wanted to, whether he was groomed into taking part in these crimes, or just flat out forced to take part in them. And his defense was that he was essentially groomed by his father, and his lawyers encouraged him to plead no contest, because him and his dad had 2 separate trials, so they did opt to split them. And while James was representing himself and pleading not guilty, Ted kept his representation and pled no contest. And he admitted what he'd done.
Acting the fool.
Well, he admitted what he had done, and his lawyers argued that he was raised to commit crimes exactly like this one. And when I was mentioning his mom and his sister earlier, talking about all of those stories of abuse and everything that went on in the home, that was on the stand. And so they're testifying kind of on his behalf. Like, everyone's kind of admitting, yes, Ted did this. Like, they can't really not admit it. It's all on camera. But they're trying to justify, like, was this by his own free will?
I mean, you're pretty right when you say that he was essentially raised in an environment to commit a crime like this.
Yeah, he was. And from what I'm getting out of the articles with his mother and his sister that discuss this testimony, they agree that, yes, Ted did some absolutely terrible things and does deserve to be held accountable, at least to some degree. They're basically saying, like, don't give him 800 years is really what they're asking for. And this argument really kind of just goes back to, like, nature versus nurture, and we've given our opinion before. I think it could be either one. I think it could be both working together. It depends on the situation.
Yeah, it depends on the case.
Yeah. And at the end of the trial, Ted, he was convicted of 19 charges, including armed robbery by use of force, burglary, armed with a dangerous weapon, taking hostages, driving and operating a vehicle without permission, first-degree reckless endangered safety, and first-degree homicide. Just like his father, he was found guilty on all counts, and for his case, deliberation only took a couple of hours. I don't know how long it was for James's, but his was quick.
Oh, yeah, they were like, no, he didn't.
Yeah. So I'm not going to give you his sentence quite yet. Right. I'm not going to give you a sentence quite yet, because in 2005, he was actually granted a new trial.
What?
So, again, these details are super fuzzy, but his lawyers filed the appeal because of a potential juror bias.
Oh, I hate that one. It happens all the time, I feel like.
Well, there was a law change in between his trial and 2005, which allowed this appeal to happen. And I don't know exactly what they're referring to by juror bias, because that can mean a whole huge amount of things.
Oh, yeah.
My belief, and this is just kind of a speculation on my part, I saw nothing that confirms this at all, but I think that a lot of it has to do with where the jurors were pulled from, what county. Because I think it was the same county where the crimes were committed, where it was all broadcast on the news. And I think that's what created juror bias, because they knew about details well before the trial because it was broadcast. And then the new trial pulled from jurors on the opposite side of the state. So I think that's what happened, but I'm not entirely sure.
I feel like that's certainly possible, because I feel like that's one of the most common things they appeal on, which is like,
yeah,
jury poll status.
Mm-hmm. And if, again, dates were hard to find. If James was tried before Ted, that's a lot of local news.
Yeah.
So I to me, that makes like the most sense and like the kind of the simplest answer of what the juror bias could be in this case, but it might not have been.
Right.
All I know is that he was granted release or a new trial. Like, that was how everything was worded. So obviously they're like, we don't want to release you. We'll give you a new trial.
You're not going anywhere, but I guess you can show up again. Waste our time.
And James has tried numerous times to get his conviction appealed, and he's always denied. So that makes me also think that he probably was tried first.
What a piece of shit.
Right?
He's tried to get it appealed multiple times. He abused his son and groomed him into helping him. Like,
oh yeah, no, he's a terrible person.
Murdered a
and
police.
I don't typically say that about people, but he's a terrible person. Like, I don't like anything about him from everything that I've learned.
Murdered a police chief. Like, what?
So Ted's defense in the second trial was essentially the same. He again pleaded no contest. But he also tried to convince the jury that his father made him insane and that he shouldn't be held accountable for his father's brainwashing. So he kind of took his first defense and just kind of like brought it up a level.
Yeah.
This didn't work. He was sentenced again. He was sentenced to 2 life sentences and an additional time for other offenses, and this totaled 565 years.
Yeah!
He will have the chance for parole in 2095.
Yeah! You know what?
Yeah.
Some of these cases that we do are really grim, and there's not a chance for much joy. But this is really
gotta take it when we can get it.
Yeah, we take it when we can get it. And 555 years in addition to 2 lifetime sentences. I'm going to celebrate that.
But this isn't going to stop him from trying to appeal.
Of course not.
He filed another appeal not that long ago, just a few years ago, I think, that said that the second trial that he had was double jeopardy.
Okay.
Apparently, he doesn't understand that after his first appeal was granted, his previous trial and conviction were completely thrown out, as if they never existed. That is not double jeopardy.
Correct.
Like, he was convicted twice, but it's not double jeopardy.
It's just that you did it twice. Clearly, in that prison, you haven't been spending much time in the law library.
Yeah, apparently. He also keeps applying to get a pet in prison and keeps getting denied. And thankfully, he keeps getting denied. I do not want this man to have a pet.
Good. He doesn't deserve a pet.
Right? I was talking to my dad about this, and my dad was getting as angry as I am about all of this, where it's like, he can't have a pet. Don't allow that to happen. Like, that's terrible. I'm like, you're right. I agree. Like,
yeah.
Do not give this man a pet.
Like, regular people don't deserve dogs. This man does not deserve a pet.
Right? But that is basically what we have in James Lutz's murder and the crimes of James and Ted Oswald. Do you have any final thoughts?
Dude, This was nuts. This was nuts.
This is a
And,
movie.
Oh.
This is an action movie, right? Like, someone write this.
Like I said at the beginning, I didn't know any of this coming into this story. And this is one of the wilder stories we've ever told.
Right?
Because before noon, these guys had committed so many felonies that they got hundreds of years in prison.
Yeah.
And I think just like the last thing I have to say is sort of what I just said, which is he's such a piece of shit for ruining his son's life and ruining like all these people's lives, like taking his son along with him and
right.
and appealing every chance he can get because it's double jeopardy because you tried me twice and found me guilty twice because I was guilty twice. Like, fuck
It's like,
you.
clearly you didn't educate your son if your son doesn't understand that, or the lawyers aren't telling him it's not double jeopardy. I don't know.
I just, like, this is the type of person that, and once again, I'm gonna get mean and rude, but this is the type of person who deserves the Wisconsin justice system.
We call it the Wisconsin death penalty.
So yes, they
because we don't have a death penalty. We have what happened to Dahmer.
Yeah, he deserves the Wisconsin death penalty. He does.
Hey, I think it's it might not be Portage. Is that Portage? So that's where the prison is. I drive back and forth between going to northern Wisconsin and Chicago. I pass it every time. And when I was a little kid, my parents taught me and my sister to wave at Jeffy because he was in prison.
And he gonna be there a while.
So we could wave at James now.
Yeah, wave at James because he's gonna be there 555 years.
Well, that's Ted. Ted's actually at a different prison. James is in for 800 years.
So we're gonna have plenty of time to wave.
And plenty of time.
Yeah, I don't often say that, but that's my final thought, is that he deserves the Wisconsin death penalty.
Yeah, I agree. So thank you all for listening to Have You Heard About This Case. If you liked this episode, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. You can also follow us on Spotify, and you can find us on Instagram at Have You Heard About This Case Pod. You can email us at haveyouheardaboutThisCase@gmail.com, or you can find us on TikTok at HYHATC. Thanks, and we'll talk to you later. Bye.
Bye.